comprising several aspects. So first of all, open access to scientific knowledge. And this scientific knowledge is not restricted to the scientific article alone. It's also the open research data, it's also the software, the source code, and also open hardware. So as you can see, scientific knowledge is not a scientific article alone, but also included in the other research components. Furthermore, open science considers open science infrastructure, including, for example, repositories for data sets and source code. Open science is also about the open engagement of societal actors, for example, in the form of citizen and participatory science. Open dialogue with other knowledge systems is about recognizing the richness of diverse knowledge holder and producers, for example, indigenous people. Finally, open science communication addresses the dissemination of scientific knowledge within and beyond science. So it's a bit about getting out of the scientific bubble. All these practices are built on a set of core values, including quality and integrity, which is about making research outputs widely and transparently available. Collective benefit, which means that publicly funded research should be a public good. Diversity and inclusiveness addresses the diversity of knowledge and research outputs. And finally, equity and fairness is about leveling the field. So everyone should be able to access and contribute to science, disregarding who you are and where you are coming from. In my opinion, this definition is very complete because it does not only focus on open access, but also pays attention to the other open science principles, such as open software and open infrastructure. And this definition does not only consider technical aspects, but also societal issues. So this slide tells us a lot about what open science means, but it doesn't tell us much about the benefits. Let me show you one example. So several researchers around the globe have developed a vaccine against corona quicker than ever before, and this is very good, very good. And one of these vaccines is the Russian vaccine Sputnik V. But Europe and the US had strong doubts regarding this vaccine. They did not trust it. Why was that? Certainly ideological reasons played a role. So probably it's also a bit this very old-fashioned game between the East and the West. However, there are also science-based doubts. So for example, the European Medical Agency, in short EMA, evaluates the data of the studies as they become available to decide if they approve or disapprove a vaccine. In the case of Sputnik V, several experts checked the results of the Sputnik V study and found problematic data in the published results, which is why they made several requests to access the raw data set. But these requests were never answered. The authors of this article argue that data sharing is one of the cornerstones of research integrity. It should not be conditional and should follow the FAIR principles. Other researchers share this opinion. The author of this article concluded that the only way for concerns over Sputnik V and other vaccines to be quelled is for developers to publish full clinical study reports along with the raw data. Not only will this build confidence in COVID-19 vaccine, but it will pave the way for other developers to follow suit. And this case shows in a very nice way that being open or not being open can have consequences in politics. One of the prime ministers in Germany wanted to buy Sputnik V. But then he stated, there was a lack of verifiable documents needed to approve Sputnik V. The developers need to submit these documents. We cannot take the risk to approve a vaccine that is not documented in a scientifically verifiable way. What do you think will happen if Sputnik V turns out to be a very good vaccine? Will people take it or not? I fear the trust is lost, and they will not take it. So what do we learn from that? Apparently there's a strong connection between reporting scientific research in a transparent way and trust. Trust between researchers and other researchers, trust between researchers and politicians, and also trust between researchers and society. So transparency increases trust, whereas non-transparency increases doubt. Okay, clear, fair enough. So you might think, well, we are not studying or working in the field of medical science, we are from the geosciences, so why should we care? At ITC, you will likely work on one of these topics, including water resources, disaster management, and the other topics. So all these topics also have a strong connection to society. And that's what we want, and that's why we are doing research. So we want to contribute to society, we want to overcome today's wicked problems and societal challenges that are summarized in the Sustainable Development Goals. So without any doubt, we at ITC can say that we contribute to achieving these Sustainable Development Goals. But we have just learned that if we want to achieve something, if we want to achieve something in science and society, we need to create trust. And this trust can be created through transparency. Otherwise, you might develop a very good product, as Sputnik V might be a very good product, but the people will not take it because they don't have trust. And open science can help you to increase the transparency. But making your research more transparent and increasing trust in your research are not the only benefits of open science. Related to that, open science can be a helpful tool to counteract science deniers. By doing open science, you can improve the quality of your research results and facilitate access to the materials. The problems underlying the Sustainable Development Goals are very urgent, and open science can help to accelerate scientific progress. So if we are doing research for the benefits of society, and if open science helps to valorize this research, then we should think about doing open science. It is often said that open science is a bottom-up initiative led by researchers. But actually, to be honest, science is also very top-down at some point. And it's not like open science is a niche endeavor. It's actually on the agenda of quite a few stakeholders involved in the scientific process. UNESCO, for example, is currently working on a recommendation on open science, which also includes the definition I showed at the beginning. Also, some reviewers refused to referee an article because not all information were available to check the paper in sufficient detail. The new European program, Horizon Europe, is based on several lessons learned, of which one is to reinforce openness through open science policies. Apparently, there's also some development going on, or some movement, when it comes to open science. The people from the European Commission speak about the evolution of open science, which is getting more and more important. At the beginning, there was just a little bit of open access, so not that much if you consider the other open science principles. But now, with the new Horizon Europe program, open science is embedded throughout the program. The Group on Earth Observation, in short GEO, recognizes that the societal benefit arising from Earth observation can only be fully achieved through sharing of data and other research outputs. Finally, the Dutch funding agency NWO also has the aim to ensure that all research it funds is openly accessible to everyone. So if I haven't convinced you to do open science, I'm pretty sure that you will run into problems if you refrain completely from it. Apparently, there's quite some pressure from the outside. However, we should not forget the individual researcher who has a career in mind for a good reason. So the researchers also need to find their way in the scientific system. But there are also some more selfish reasons to do open science. More and more job calls in academia require you to outline which open science practices you followed in the past. Also, funding requirements increasingly include open science aspects. So by doing open science, you can increase your chances to get an academic position or funding by doing open science. You can also make it easier for reviewers to fully understand and verify your research, which can also shorten the entire review process. By doing open science, you can also pave the way for new collaborations with other researchers. And finally, you can increase the impact of your research in science and society. Despite all these benefits, open science is not the norm. But to make it the norm, we need a plan, maybe even an open science plan. And that's what I was working on during the last few months. ITC's strategic plan for open science outlines a plan to achieve the transition towards the open science, and it contains 5 initiatives: Open Science at ITC, the ITC Knowledge Hub, Open Educational Resources, the Open Science Community Twente, and Research and Funding. The first initiative is about investigating which open science, to which degree open science is done at ITC. So which open science practices ITC researchers would like to learn, what the obstacles are that hinder them from doing open science, and at which stage of the research process they need support. Based on these insights, we will develop training materials for students, PhD candidates, and researchers. In addition, we will also develop guidelines and recommendations that explain a bit more how to adhere to open science principles. And finally, we will identify the needs and requirements for the so-called ITC Knowledge Hub. The ITC Knowledge Hub contains tools and services to access, create, and publish open research. In the Open Science Plan, we describe the ITC Knowledge Hub as follows. The ITC Knowledge Hub will be a central place for authors to create and publish, and for readers, including reviewers, to access open reproducible research. Open reproducible research refers to achieving the same results, for example, figures and numbers, as reported in a paper, using the same publicly accessible source code and data. The ITC Knowledge Hub will support publishing transparent, verifiable, and reusable research results at different stages of the research process workflow, by providing guidelines, code check services, workflows, interactive papers, and a variety of reproducibility tools, considering the individual needs of authors and readers. This figure provides an overview of the research cycle and some options to make each step a bit more transparent. The ITC Knowledge Hub could work as follows. For the initial phase, the ITC Knowledge Hub could provide guidance on how to publish a so-called pre-registration. Researchers can use pre-registrations to publish their study design before starting the data collection. It's actually a nice way to collect feedback on your methodology very early. And it's also a nice way to tell others what you're working on. Then the ITC Knowledge Hub can support researchers adhering to open data and open source software principles. It can also inform how to store data that follows the fair, care, and trust principles. You remember the open science definition I showed at the beginning. Scientific knowledge is not a scientific article alone, but also the data and the software. That is why in the context of the ITC Knowledge Hub, we speak about a research compendium that contains all materials needed to reproduce the results. That is the scientific article, data, code, the computational environment, and also metadata. Before submitting the research compendium to a journal, the authors can request a so-called code check, but I will come to that later. The Knowledge Hub could also provide some information on how to store preprints, which are non-peer-reviewed scientific articles that are published before peer review, and also a nice way to disseminate research results earlier than after the long process of publishing a research article. Preprints were, by the way, also very important during the pandemic. Finally, an essential goal of the ITC Knowledge Hub is also to facilitate reuse of materials by other researchers. Besides these options, we might also think of services to assist researchers throughout the research cycle. One example is code check. Code check is a process for independent reproduction of computations underlying research. The overall underlying question is, was the code reproducible once for someone else? It's a very simple four-step process. In step 1, the authors of a scientific article provide me with the data and the source code underlying the research article. In step 2, I check if the code runs and generates the expected output, such as figures, tables, and numbers, just by visually comparing the reproduced results with those reported in the paper. In step 3, I create a certificate, including how I ran the code, what was checked, and also some recommendations on how to improve the code. In step 4, I publish the certificate on Zenodo and create a badge for the GitHub repository. You can also cite the certificate in your paper to show that you care for reproducibility. And that's how it looks like. On the left, you can see the certificate, and on the right, the mentioning in the supplementary materials section. Here, the authors mentioned a code check, that a code check was carried out, and they also included a link to the certificate. Let's go to the third initiative, which is open educational resources. This initiative is about exploring the options to realize open educational resources at ITC and providing lecturers with guidelines and support to create them. Open educational resources are teaching materials released publicly and under an open license, allowing free access, use, modification, and redistribution. Open educational resources are an essential aspect of open science, as I mentioned at the beginning. And because they support lifelong learning, educating the public, and distance learning. And we also have it on the right, if you look at the posters. But it's not clear yet to everyone if and how it is possible to release open educational resources at ITC or also at the University of Twente. So we need to answer several questions. Does ITC contribute to open educational resources, and if so, how? How could distance teaching at ITC based on open educational resources look like in 5 years? And what are potential business models around open educational resources? For example, the materials might be open, but the students could pay for the recognition in the form of certification. These are still open questions that need to be answered. We started already with a document explaining the basic concepts, challenges, and business models around open educational resources. This document aims to bring everyone on the same level. And based on this document, we will initiate a discussion to answer the other questions I mentioned before. What else is needed to achieve the transition towards open science? We consider current practices, technologies, services, and education. What we still need is some kind of a space to keep up the discussion about the evolving area of open science. And this is where open science communities come into play. As you can see, almost every university in the Netherlands has an open science community. And there are also a few outside the Netherlands. The goal of open science communities is to support the cultural change towards open science by addressing the questions and concerns of researchers. Open science communities are interdisciplinary bottom-up communities to promote, learn, share, and discuss open science practices. I want to highlight that open science communities are not an expert club, and everyone can join such a community no matter how much you know about open science. All you need is a bit of curiosity. So in this initiative number 4, the goal is to create an open science community at the University of Twente, which already happened. We have a website. On this website, you can join as a community. You can join the community as a member and get regular updates about the Open Science Kitchen events, which are monthly online meetings in which we invite speakers to present and discuss current topics around open science. Our next Open Science Kitchen event is, by the way, on the 4th of November at 14. Frank Ostermann will give a talk about reproducibility in the geosciences. You will find all information on the website. So this initiative is already quite active, but we are still at the beginning. Our last initiative is research and funding. And for this initiative, I only have a few bullet points. As you could see in this talk, the plan is pretty ambitious. I am coordinating these initiatives, but of course I cannot realize all of them by myself, which is why we need to find a way to make open science a bit more self-contained at ITC. This could be achieved by sharing responsibilities. So we would like to hire additional staff at some point, so we are planning to apply for funding to hire, for example, student assistants or an open data officer. A further idea is to get budget for so-called open science ambassadors. The idea is to allocate one ambassador to each department. These ambassadors could actively support the transition to open science, for example, by updating their colleagues about recent open science developments and help them to follow open science principles. And that's the plan for the next 5 years. We will see how far we get, and that was my little overview about open science at ITC for now. If you have any questions or comments, feel free. Thank you.